We need to learn less math since computers can do it faster. True or false?
False. Both.
Knowing how to code will become more important than knowing how to read. True or false?
False. Yeah, false. I agree.
Art and music should be less important than science and technology. True or false?
True. No, Carsten, that's a false.
Dear listeners, welcome to the 43rd episode of the Skills Factory. Let me introduce you our guest speakers for this episode. Carsten Beck, Director of the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies.
Hi Maria, good to be here.
And Thor Svanholm, Futures Literacy Expert from Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. Welcome, colleagues.
Hello there.
As we explore the future of education, we'll uncover 3 practical tips on how to thrive in this new era of learning. Whether you're a student, educator, or lifelong learner, these insights will help you to navigate the challenges of the future. Let's get started. So, Carsten and Thor, to kick things off, what changes do you foresee shaping the way we acquire knowledge in the future?
Good question, Maria. From my side, I would really broaden the perspective, because the obvious thing would be to say we need to look into how digitalization and AI is changing everything. And I guess we'll get back to that. But in a broader sense, I would look into 2 megatrends. I would look into automation and labor supply in the future, because I would say that obviously lots of processes will change due to technological advances and other advances as well. And we need to look into each profession. I'm an economist. We need to look into my profession. We need to look into every other profession to sort of try to steer and navigate according to this pressure of automation. So that's one thing. I would really look into labor supply, because if we look to a lot of the big economies in the world, a labor supply will be a critical factor. From a labor market perspective, we need to be better in preparing people of all ages and all colors and creeds for whatever is happening in our labor markets in the future.
Labor supply, you mean the skills that people receive that they can then apply in the labor market, is that right?
Yeah, and also quantity. People. Where do we have people? What kind of people do we have skills competence wise? Because we are facing a future in many of our countries, not all countries, but in many of our countries where labor supply will be an increasingly big problem. So we need to be super smart.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, this is already an issue, for instance, in UK, when we saw after Brexit the shortages of the truck drivers. In a way, started and accelerated. We saw some examples, but you're saying that it's getting worse.
Yeah, well, I agree. Very interesting perspectives. I think I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle, perhaps because I'm an anthropologist by training, and that's a good thing. Rather philosophical, perhaps. I think I would like to start asking what we mean by knowledge, because I see a sort of a shift coming along in learning and education, especially from educators. Something interesting is going on. I think the skills employers are increasingly asking for something else than only sort of the academic grounding we've seen for decades. Increasingly, there's a growing sense or a demand for sort of the more interpersonal skills, like being able to adjust and prepare for agile learning and all these things, right? So there's something going on in the educational sphere, sort of a discourse.
Do you find it extraordinary also from an anthropological point of view that in 21st century, what makes us human is what is most in demand?
Yeah, absolutely. I generally feel this at a day-to-day basis in dialogue with educators, with educational institutions, that they see that we need to do things differently, and that requires a whole new role of the learner. Like how do you go and become part of a learning environment if it's not about hard skills that we are normally associating with teaching environments or with learning environments? And what does it require from teachers in order to teach these human parts of being, right?
Because, you said you're an anthropologist, I'm a historian by background. And in the 19th, 20th century, being an educated person would mean to have a lot of knowledge, as encyclopedia knowledge, no? We can call it that way. What does it mean in the 21st century to be an educated person?
I think we need to look at it through what is knowledge, what is skills, and what is values, right? And I hear this more often from educators, that we need to look at it through those 3 perspectives, through those 3 lenses. And the role of education is to sort of add to or cultivate in all 3 domains. While we've sort of forgotten the last part of it, we've clumped or put the first 2 of them together, where we create learning experiences that are engaging, by cultivating values as well as knowledge and skills.
In one of our previous episodes, we spoke with a futurist literacy expert, Riel Miller, and he was actually quite tough on colleges, schools. Where do you see the primary environments for learning are shifting? So what will be the place where people will learn the most in the future?
That's a wonderful question, because I would imagine both Mr. Miller and Tor would look at it from a rather sort of a disruptive perspective. So if I should be sort of the old conservative guy here, I mean, is a campus relevant in the future? Yes, I absolutely believe so. Is it important to meet and interact with other students? Absolutely, 100%. The role of teachers, don't know much about that, but do we need to have some sort of interaction between students and teachers? Absolutely. So even though the processes might change a lot, and I do agree to that, and I think it's a super difficult question, by the way, I still think that a lot of the physical surroundings and also a lot of the processes will actually stay put. And I'm 56 years old. So I've been working as a futurist for 35 years.
I think to take universities as an example, they have a huge impact on our society, obviously, because of their legitimacy, and they have a huge community impact as well. And of course, we trust them as sort of these institutions that provide answers and brings new knowledge and all these things. And I think that won't change at all. I think that is sort of set in stone, more or less. But there's something in the role of the university, right? I think we need to expand these learning environments to move outside the classical teaching spaces, right? The old school classes and the lecture halls and all these things, where we sort of cross-pollinate from different types of learning environments. Because, obviously, there's so many places besides just at uni or in school where you learn.
Don't you feel there is a lot of resistance from traditional education sector as when it comes to losing the monopoly on providing skills and knowledge?
Definitely. It's obviously there's also a lot of power in being able to define what kind of educational futures are we facing, what are the skill demands that will dictate how the future will shape, and obviously there's a power struggle going on there.
Yeah, I would say when I talk to educators and teachers and school principals, I do agree with the monopoly. If you have a monopoly, monopolies are super nice. It makes life beautiful. Yeah, very comfortable, Maria. It's just, okay, this works, eh? And of course, we need to challenge all kinds of monopolies. That's how we create progress. I fully agree to that. I would also say one of my concerns, and once again, I'm just playing the old guy here. One thing I hear a lot, and I think we've talked about it as well, Tor, is that we keep increasing demands or put on new layers of complexity to the educational system. If you want to change the campus or change the structure of educational systems and add on new layers of complexity, my fear is a little bit that systems will collapse and implode because it just becomes too much. There's too many demands. So if we have these conversations, and I think they're important, I'm not trying to stop them, but if we have these conversations, I think a very important part of the conversation is which elements of the educational system can we delete in the future? What can we stop doing? So if we are aiming to add that to curriculums, what is it that will be less important in the future? And that, of course, could be old-fashioned ways of learning. But I think we need to keep this balance. If we add stuff, we need to take away stuff as well.
When we speak to teachers and to learners, they say that the content of what is taught in school should somehow diminish, because otherwise, where do you find time to do the soft skills, to develop all kind of different competences?
Yeah, that's tough. That's a tough question. I think that's something in how we prioritize the ways we plan teaching. I think that's more important. Of course, there's knowledge that you need to know. You need to know where you're coming from. You need to know the society that you're part of, why our institutions look the way that they do, why climate change is a real issue. And there's very little space for this part, the next part, which is where do we go from here? And how do we do that? And how do I, as an individual, contribute to society that is future-facing or looking forward, right? Standing on what we know, all the knowledge that we have. But there's something there in the prioritization of how we plan teaching and how we conduct it.
Several times you mentioned the word engagement, and I would like to stick to it, because in one of our previous podcasts, we had Carl Wyman, a Nobel Prize in Physics. And he said something that really is important. He said that learning should not be always easy. The learning should be tough in a way. The learning should include a big effort from a learner. I see, Thor, you were disagreeing with that.
I agree with it. I mean, there's a but, and that is depending on who you are. I mean, are we talking about children? We need to approach learning slightly different. It needs to be fun and playful. And of course, that can also be tough, but I think it's different from when you're talking about adults. But I agree with that.
It's a wonderful question. Should the future be tough at large, and should education be tough? I would imagine that the toughness, especially when we talk about universities, it will be there because it's super complex issues that are being taught at universities. One of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about is polarization when we talk about the student landscape and young people. I do think also with the toughness parameter and all the other changes that are facing educational systems, I think that could actually be a scenario which is wonderful. It's fantastic if you have the whatever it takes to make the right decision, whatever right decision is for you. But do we get everybody on board this future? And maybe I'm not really talking about people who should go to university, but into other parts of the educational system. So
I think there's, and this is more anecdotal than evidence-based, but I think there's a majority of teachers who find it harder to teach the creative part, the speculative part of teaching than the hard part. You know, the hard sciences, the mathematics, the physics, and all these things, the difficult abstract disciplines of teaching. I think more teachers will find it difficult. How do you teach the future compared to teaching the past, right?
Soft skills like teamwork, flexibility, creative, analytical thinking are often categorized, and as Thor, you mentioned, as essential for the future. But how do you see that evolution of art, music, as being less important than science and technology for the future?
when we look to arts and culture, for me at least, there's a different. The cultural aspects will be more important because, once again, looking at the future labor market, all these so-called soft skills, which I actually think are super hard as well, will be more important. Now I'm really sounding conservative. How important are arts as such in educating everybody and preparing everybody for the future we are discussing? I would maybe doubt that a little bit. I do agree to the culture part. I think that is immensely important, and I do know that there's probably lots of research showing that learning to play an instrument helps you in all parts of your life as well. Absolutely, but once again, it is also a little bit a prioritization game. So what is it we prioritize?
So, Karsten, in a way, you are saying that science and technology is more important for the future than art.
Science and technology is more important. We are facing a number of issues in this world. Some call it a public crisis, but the solution for me is not even more economists, even though we are wonderful people. It's science and technology implemented in the right way and in a way that supports and it benefits the many people of all our societies, of course, so not just the elite and all of that. But if you want me to make a tough call, more science, more technology, engineers will save the world.
I don't disagree at all. But again, it depends on how you frame it. You could easily compare apples with pears here, because obviously arts and culture is not gonna get us out into the universe. That's obvious. But again, just to add another perspective, I mean, if we're talking about the younger generations, in our part of the world, we're facing a huge sort of well-being crisis, right? And I don't think the hard sciences, the natural sciences are going to solve that. Obviously, that's part of becoming. You need to know about that part of life, but there's something else that we sort of need to be able to look more into, where I think arts and culture play a bigger role or have more impact when it comes to solving sort of those challenges, right? Because how do you become a sentient, emotional being? Not by studying physics, I'd argue, but by being sort of disposed to or experiencing art, movies, theater, all these things that are stories about where we're coming from and also where we're going. because, and you said you had Real Miller on this show. He's one to sort of argue for something called the poverty of the imagination, right? So the stories and the images that we have facing forward or turning towards the future are very few. They're very dominant and sort of painting a very dark and hopeless future. And I think arts and culture really helps us turn on the lights in some ways, seeing and creating new images of the future that the hard sciences cannot. And again, it's not more important than the other. We need both aspects of learning and becoming, because we want to go to Mars. We want to do all these great things for science. But if we're not hopeful individuals who see a direction and who believe we can add to it and be part of it, then that's not going to happen. We're not going to go into the universe. We're not going to solve all the big challenges in the world.
So if we need to come up with one tip for our audience on the part of soft skills and creative skills, what would that be?
I think it's important that you work on your inner development goals. And if you're a teacher, that you look to that framework for how you plan and conduct your teaching. I don't know if your audience know it, but it is something that I've seen gaining more and more traction as the sort of the other side of the sustainable development goals, which are currently not going very, very well. Let's state the facts here. That is the conclusion. We're not on path to fulfilling the sustainable development goals. But as I said, the inner development goals are what is required of us as human beings in order to both function and be well in the future. It is the combination of knowledge, skills, and values that we all require in order to be participant citizens who can help solve some of the challenges that we face, but also just being in peace with ourselves.
So inner development goals will be like the goals that you put yourself covering those three areas, right?
Yeah, exactly. To take an example, it's about how do you stimulate curiosity? It's that simple. And you can do that even if you're a physics professor or a biology teacher. How do you work with curiosity as a design principle, as something that is integrated in all the things in the curriculum that you need to be teaching? It's about compassion. How do we add compassion to conversations that perhaps are not really that used to including compassion? Like when we're talking about non-human species and biological systems, all these things where we've historically been really bad at seeing how have we impacted and influenced those systems. Well, inner development goals are sort of addressing exactly that. Like how do you add the softer parts, the soft tissue of existence in those fields?
My next question will be about an extremely painful argument, I think, especially for parents and for the relationship between parents and learners and kids, memorization and education. So many educational systems still rely on memorization and making learners to remember the dates, the facts, the names. Do you think this approach will remain in the future? Do you think it's relevant or it's the matter of the past?
That's a wonderful question. Lots of good questions today. It will be a chicken answer because I do think you need to have a compass. Both when it comes to math and geographics and politics and society at large and whatever you're studying at university or school. And that compass is based on facts as well. But I'm a little bit concerned if we do have citizens in society where the compass is broken, then you get populism and you get discourses in society where you can actually say, I mean, it's okay for us to disagree about the future and about politics, but there's certain facts here. Come on.
It is a tough question, but I think I'll put myself on the line here and say that, no. I mean, we all have a computer in their pocket that has more computational power than the Apollo 11 mission who brought the first person or human to the moon, right? And especially younger generations, they're grown up into this world. They know exactly that they have access to all the information that they want whenever they want it in their pocket. I think we need to sort of acknowledge that. So I think, yes, perhaps there needs to be some elements of memorization. Of course, that you need a compass, as Carsten says. But I think it's going to be more important that we teach how do you acquire data, how do you gather data, and how do we become more critical of where that data comes from and how we use it, of course.
So a tip number 2 about memorization, Thor, what would that be?
I think a good tip would be focus more on the, critical thinking, being able to critically reflect on where data comes from and how it was developed, and then how do you use it. I think that's what's important here.
Dear listeners, stay tuned and remember to subscribe to this show on all platforms. We're all getting older. Our societies are getting older. So inevitably, in the range of learners, we don't have only young people. We have people of all ages. What strategies should people adapt to stay relevant at any age, actually?
We do have these aging labor forces. And I do think we will realize in most of our countries in the coming decades that the retirement systems are not sustainable. So whether we like it or not, there will be longer work lives. And how we structure that, the big political discussions. And obviously, with the speed of change, however you measure that, we will need to have this combination of working for employers in all kinds of sectors, and then going back to school, so to say, not physically, but integrating that into work life going forward. And I'm struggling right now because once again, we hear all kinds of stories at SIFs at the moment. We hear lots of stories about people actually stopping up during the work life and saying, now I want to redirect my skills and competence profile. These kinds of stops and not vacations, because you actually maybe come to school again. I think that will be more important. So that's one thing we need to look into. How can we do that in a structured way, and also a way that is financially sustainable for these people? I mean, if you are 52 or something like that, and you want to say, I want to go back to school, but you live in a house or in a flat, and how do you make ends meet? That's not going to be easy. So that's one thing. And then the integration of whatever happens in the labor market and new skills and competences developed in the educational system, the match there, as far as I hear it, is simply not good enough.
I saw a lot of studies. Actually, TF also did a study about the fact that young people of today will have to change their profession from 7 to 8 times maybe during their lifetime. So it's a continuous change, a continuous learning. What tip would you give to those people?
I think we've actually written a report once that said the same thing about being open to changing your career 7 times or something like that. But it's perhaps more simple as a minute, right? That you're open towards things are going to change. To be concrete, because I had this question not too long ago at a student festival here in Copenhagen, and I think we sort of through the discussion arrived at something very simple. It's what drives you. What's your interest in life? What's your motivation? If you stay on top of that, if you're into that and trying to, find new knowledge, be curious on how your interest might change, I think that's really important. I think that is perhaps the most simple and clearest answer I can give to that question. Find your interests, your motivation, and remain curious.
It's funny. So because in the 20th century, many people decided about the job or the profession using different kind of criteria, using wages or local labor market. What you're saying is that in 21st century, people have to really be driven by their interest when choosing the profession.
The American psychologist Eric Hoffer, who said something along the lines with, in times of change, learners will inherit the world, right? And the learned or the knowers will be beautifully equipped to deal with a world that does not longer exist, right? Yeah. So I think that's essential. The curiosity, finding that thing that really drives you and something that interests you, yeah. and staying true to that. And I think you will find your path through the learning journey.
Yeah. But one of my concerns would actually be what happens if people sort of discover in this process they have no passion, at least passion for anything relating to education or to work. And I know that it sounds a little bit weird maybe, but I've come to see, I mean, so many times when we have these discussions, now we have this wonderful podcast, and I love my job. I know, Thor, you love your job as well. This is interesting. It's fun. It's creative. It's fantastic. But But if we look to the labor force, lots of people don't find this fantastic at all. And lots of people are basically in it because they need to have a paycheck every week or every month. So I've increasingly over the last couple of years been interested in, okay, all the people or all the situations where people are passive. And when asked about what drives you and what motivates you, nothing. I just want to sit home and watch Netflix or game or whatever you could come up with. And I think the educational system, and maybe we're back to schools for kids, not so much university. How do we make sure we get that portion of kids and also later on the labor force on a good path? Everybody will have some sort of passion. It could just be gaming, and then okay, we need to work with that somehow. But sometimes, I remember. Can I tell you an old story? At SIFS, when I started back in 1990, there was an office manager who retired back in 92 or something like that. It's back in the Stone Ages, and this office manager, she said on the day of her retirement, "This is the best day of my life." Exactly those words. And I was thinking, even back then, I was just a kid. I was thinking, okay, but you have two kids. You gave birth to two kids. No, the best day of her life was when she retired. Was she a good employee? Yes, absolutely. But passion for work, none whatsoever. And that also, if we have a more individualized educational system with all the tools and all the AI based and all of that, how can we make sure that group, and I don't know how big that group is, but maybe it's bigger than we think.
I think you're right. No, I think you're right. Just to add shortly to that, I think you're right. I think there's something interesting in looking into how organizations, if you are asked, well, if we sort of talk about or focus only on the adults who are already in the labor market, who are already working, who might have grown a little, they've sort of locked in a little bit and not really struggling a bit to find what drives them. I think there's something interesting looking at it from the employer's perspective. How can you work with that? Like, how can you create relations in the workspace where people can learn from other people, be inspired by other people to sort of get back to what, because everyone have made some really big decisions in life, from what do I want to study, what do I want to become? And at some point during that process, there must have been sort of a spark, right? And of course, you can lose that spark, you can lose that interest. But I think it's how do you create those relations that sort of put us back on track on what motivates.
We have a tradition in our podcast. One question is usually made to our guest speakers by ChatGPT. And what better opportunity than the discussion about the future? So here comes the question formulated by GPT. If robots and computers can do a lot of thinking for us, do we still need to teach people to be really smart? Or should we teach them how to work with the robots instead?
The chicken answers both one more time. Because work processes will be dominated by more technology, obviously, in any forms and shapes. And we need to understand our role in that. I'm absolutely an optimist there. And we need to be smart about that.
Yeah, it's not an either or sort of question. I mean, it depends on what we mean by smart. Again, to come back to my own points previously, I mean, it's there are many ways to be. You can be emotionally intelligent, and that can be both inwards, and it can also be in the sense of how does AI work? What sort of motives and values have artificial intelligence been developed with? Because someone made that, someone produced that. It's built on our own data and our own behavior. So there's something about emotional intelligence and things like that at least I see being more important. Because AI is gonna be able to do a lot of things better than any of us. Just to speak the truth, there's a lot of things that AI is gonna be able to do that we won't be able to do. So I think it really comes down to what kind of things do we want to be doing in an AI future.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a quote this summer that went viral. What's her name? Joanna Mashakovska or something, who said, I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so I can do arts. So that I can write and all these things and not the other way around. And I really believe that is true.
At this point, I would like to thank our guest speakers for this really optimistic conversation. Karsten Beck, Director of the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. Thanks a lot, Karsten.
Thank you.
And Thor Svanholm, Future Literacy Expert from Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. Thanks a lot, Thor, for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
And thanks to all of you, our listeners, and stay tuned as there is much more to come. Goodbye.